Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, November 17th, 2022. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announces she will not run for a leadership position in the next Congress, when the Democrats will be in the minority. It ends a two-decade run as party leader, including the first and only woman to become U.S. House Speaker. President Joe Biden calling Speaker Pelosi the most consequential speaker in our history. Speaker Pelosi also saying that she will stay on as a representative in Congress. Same with the current House Majority Leader, Democrat Steny Hoyer of Maryland, who says he will step down from leadership but continue on as a U.S. representative. Third currently in line is the Majority Whip, James Clyburn of South Carolina. He says he will be in leadership in the next Congress, or at least seek the position, but not the top spots. Coming up, we hear from Speaker Pelosi and talk with a reporter from The Hill about who the new Democratic leaders might be and what the changes at the top will mean. Two incoming House Republican Committee chairmen, James Comer and Jim Jordan, say their investigations find that President Biden was actively involved in overseas business dealings with his son Hunter, and there is evidence of money laundering, tax evasion, and other crimes. Some House Republicans objecting to sending more U.S. aid to Ukraine to continue the war against Russia's invasion. Comes just as the Biden administration is requesting another $38 billion. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas talks about a judge's ruling that the administration will soon not be able to use the Title 42 COVID-19 health emergency rationale to expel migrants seeking asylum at the U.S.-Mexico border. And the first quadriplegic elected to Congress, James Langevin of Rhode Island, testifies about making it easier for people with disabilities to fly on airlines. He shares some of the troubles he's run into boarding planes. Now to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, saying she's not going to run for another term as House Democratic leader, but she will stay on in Congress, continue to represent her San Francisco, California district. This comes after projections that Republicans have won a majority of seats in the House in last week's election and will take over come January with the new Congress. Washington Post writes that Speaker Pelosi, 82 years old, is the party's long-serving leader in the House and the first woman to hold the speakership. She pledged in 2018 to limit herself to 4 more years as House Democratic leader. Speaker Pelosi speaking today on the House floor.
My colleagues, I stand before you as Speaker of the House, as a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a devout Catholic, a proud Democrat, and a patriotic American, a citizen of the greatest republic in the history of the world. Which President Lincoln called the last best hope on earth. Indeed, in the words attributed to another of our colleagues, the legendary Daniel Webster, he said, "Hold on, my friends, to the Constitution of your country and the government established under it. Miracles do not cluster. That which has happened but once in 6,000 years cannot be expected to happen often." Indeed, American democracy is majestic, but it is fragile. Many of us here have witnessed its fragility firsthand, tragically, in this chamber. And so democracy must be forever defended from forces that wish it harm. Last week, the American people spoke, and their voices were raised in defense of liberty, of the rule of law, and of democracy itself. With these elections, the people stood in the breach and repelled the assault on democracy. They resoundingly rejected violence and insurrection, and in doing so, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat from California, on the House floor today. She spoke for about 15 minutes and then mingled with the members of Congress and got congratulations for another 15 minutes or so. We've got the full video at our website, cspan.org. Near the end of her remarks, she made it official. She is stepping down from leadership.
Scripture teaches us that for everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. My friends, no matter what title you all, my colleagues, have bestowed upon me, Speaker, Leader, Whip, there is no greater official honor for me than to stand on this floor and to speak for the people of San Francisco. This I will continue to do as a member of the House, speaking for the people of San Francisco, serving the great state of California, and defending our Constitution. And with great confidence in our caucus, I will not seek re-election to Democratic leadership in the next Congress. For me, the hour's come for a new generation to lead the Democratic caucus that I so deeply respect. And I'm grateful that so many are ready and willing to shoulder this awesome responsibility. Madam Speaker, standing here today, I'm endlessly grateful for all of life's blessings, for my Democratic colleagues whose courage and commitment with the support of your families have made many of these accomplishments possible. In fact, could not have been done without you. For my dear husband, Paul, who has been my beloved partner in life and my pillar of support, thank you. We're all grateful for all the prayers and well wishes as he continues his recovery. Thank you so much.
More on House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's announcement that she's not going to run again for Democratic leader. Joining us on the phone is Mychael Schnell, congressional reporter with The Hill. Speaker Pelosi, in her floor speech, quoted scripture, "For every time there is a season." But do we know why she is leaving?
Speaker Pelosi did not give a specific reason why she is leaving, other than she said that she wants to create a new generation of leadership. So she said, for me, the hour has come for a new generation to lead the Democratic caucus that I so deeply respect. So one theory could be, and I think that a lot of reporters have sort of gotten into the mindset of, you don't try to predict what Nancy Pelosi is thinking because 9 times out of 10 you'll be wrong. But maybe it was to, curry in this new generation of leadership. Another possibility is that she would, of course, Democrats will now be serving in the minority after Republicans took control of the House officially last night. So maybe that's just not something she wanted to do in leadership. But also it could be the brutal attack on her husband, Paul Pelosi. We remember a couple weeks ago when she was speaking to Anderson Cooper after that incident, she said that the attack on her husband affected her decision, would affect her decision of what to do in terms of her political future. That sort of led some to think, will she step back or will she stay in the game because she doesn't want to falter to the threats? So there are a lot of different theories out there, followers of some people don't, everyone has their opinion sort of, but we have not actually heard specifically what pushed Pelosi to make this decision.
And we found out today that the current Majority Leader, Steny Hoyer, plans to also step back, so the top 2 spots are going to be open, and the current Democratic whip, James Clyburn, is going to stay on but not run for those spots. So what happens now with the leadership elections? When are they, and who are the front runners?
Sure. So leadership elections right now are scheduled for November 30th and December 1st. And none of the top contenders have yet announced their candidacies for, I guess, what you could call the top 3 positions, which is minority leader, whip, and then, top 3 minority leader, whip, and then assistant leader. We have not heard from those candidates yet. A lot of the top contenders have said that they want Pelosi to have her day, for the focus to be on her. But there's been a lot of behind-the-scenes jockeying for those 3 positions if the case did happen that Pelosi and Hoyer stepped back. So likely Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, a Democrat from New York, will be minority leader. Likely Catherine Clark, as she was currently the assistant speaker, will be minority whip. And then things get a little interesting. There has been reporting out there that Clyburn will seek the position of assistant leader, though he has not specifically announced yet. And and in terms of Aguilar, it still remains to be seen where he will end up. So Politico had reported that Clyburn will be going to that assistant leader role, but again, we have not seen any candidacies yet announced.
We're talking with Mychael Schnell, congressional reporter with The Hill. A very big generational change, as it's been described. Top 2 leaders leaving, they're in their 80s. The people coming in will be 30 years younger. What does that mean for the direction of the House Democratic Party?
I think it remains to be seen, and I think we'll just have to wait and see how this new generation of leaders how they direct the caucus. I think it is also worth mentioning that Pelosi and Hoyer, while they're stepping back from leadership, they're going to remain in the House, and even if they won't be, said leaders and listed leaders after leading the caucus for 20 some odd years, they will still be very important figures within the caucus. But I think it shows that, as more younger generation is elected to Congress, we saw Gen Z voters come out in droves for this most recent midterm election. Some Democrats are starting to realize that we sort of need some younger blood and new blood at the top echelons of Democratic leadership, and that's what we're seeing right now. So how that plays out and how that directs the party, it remains to be seen. But I mean, needless to say, and very, very safe to say, that this is a big shakeup and a big change for the Democratic caucus.
And finally, what is Speaker Nancy Pelosi's legacy as leader?
Oh, I mean, that list just can go on for a very long time. First, obviously, number one on the list is she was the first female speaker when she first took the gavel in, I believe it was 2009, when she first was elected speaker, and she served then. And then she came back after Democrats lost control of the House in the 2011 midterm. She then came back afterwards, and served again starting in 2019. So just absolutely needless to say that Speaker Pelosi, that was her. That's one of her largest legacies, is breaking the glass ceiling and becoming the first female speaker. But she's also helped. She first started serving as speaker in 2007. My apologies there. But and then other from that, she's had a lot of legislative accomplishments also, of course, being in Congress when the Affordable Care Act was passed. That was a very large one. And she'll also be remembered for being in charge of the Democratic caucus during former President Trump's 2 impeachment proceedings. She presided over those. She gavelled in the articles when they were voted on in the House. So the Speaker's list of legacies is a very long one after her 20 years atop the caucus. But certainly we'll be hearing about those to come and going through those as she sort of takes her last few weeks in Democratic leadership.
Mychael Schnell, congressional reporter with The Hill. Find stories at thehill.com and on Twitter at Mychael Schnell, MyChael, SCHNELL. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
President Joe Biden tweeting, "When I think of Nancy Pelosi, I think of dignity. History will note her as the most consequential Speaker of the House of Representatives in history. She is the first, last, and always for the people. America owes her a debt of gratitude for her service, patriotism, and dignity." And the White House says that President Biden spoke with Speaker Pelosi this morning and congratulated her on her historic tenure as Speaker of the House. The House Democratic Caucus Chair Hakeem Jeffries, as mentioned, being talked about as the next speaker, putting out a statement praising Speaker Pelosi and adding, "The Speaker often reminds us that our diversity is our strength. I know we will draw on that wisdom often as we come together as a caucus to begin a new chapter, reflecting the hopes, dreams, and aspirations of the people we represent." And former House Speaker Paul Ryan, Republican from Wisconsin, with this tweet, "I tip my cap as I welcome Speaker Nancy Pelosi to the former Speakers Club and congratulate her on a historic career in the House." The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, was in the House chamber during Speaker Pelosi's speech today. He then went back over to the Senate and made some remarks on the Senate floor.
It's hard to fathom that very soon we'll begin a new Congress where she's no longer a member of the party leadership. In my time as Democratic leader and as Majority Leader, she's been the best partner and ally I could ask for, and we've also been friends. She shared the joy of the birth of my children. I shared the joy of so many of the good things that happened in her family. She would always be talking about her family and always wanted to hear about mine. She was not only a great legislator, she was a great human being. And today, particularly, I want to wish the very best to her family, especially Paul. I cannot imagine how painful and scary it has been for the Pelosis in the aftermath of Paul's attack. But as usual, Speaker Pelosi carried herself with the same courage, grace, and dignity that she's always been true to. Finally, and maybe most importantly, Nancy Pelosi made our country a much better place for countless women and girls from every walk of life. Nancy Pelosi was the one to blaze the trail. But you can be certain that countless other women will rise up in leadership in this country because of what she's accomplished and how she inspired them. I'm going to have more to say in the weeks to come, but for now, let me finish with this. To Nancy Pelosi, my dear, good, and close friend, thank you. Thank you for being you. Thank you for dedicating your life for public service. Thank you for teaching us so much. Thank you for inspiring us all. It's been the honor of a lifetime to work with you.
Senator Chuck Schumer, the majority leader on the Senate floor. Fox News senior congressional correspondent Chad Pergram tweeting about some other recent examples of House and Senate leaders who stepped down from leadership positions but continue to serve in Congress, as Speaker Pelosi and the Majority Leader Hoyer plan to do. These include Speaker Dennis Hastert in 2006, a Republican. Happened when he moved into the minority party. The Democrats took over. In 2004, the House Majority Leader Dick Gephardt, a Democrat, ran for president and stepped down. And in 1989, the Senate Majority Leader Robert Byrd, a Democrat, stepped down to focus on being Appropriations Committee chair. It was late last night that the Associated Press called the House race that put the Republicans in the House over the top into the majority. cspan.org/election shows currently 218 Republicans, which is the bare majority, and 211 Democrats, still a handful of House races to be called. This week, House Republicans nominated the current Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy of California for House Speaker when the new Congress convenes in January. He was on Fox News Channel Wednesday night when it became official that his party will control the 118th Congress.
We are the only Republican entity that can stop this disastrous Biden agenda. Think for one moment. It is official. One-party Democrat rule in Washington is finished. We have fired Nancy Pelosi. We have worked hard to earn this agenda. You were right that we worked very hard on getting this majority, but we put the commitment to America out there. We told the American public exactly what would we do. And think about it. The 218th seat that was called tonight was Congressman Mike Garcia, a former Naval Academy F-18 pilot. This is Los Angeles County. This is a seat that Joe Biden carried by 13 points, and we won it. And we still got more good news tonight. Madera just came back in the count for California 13th, and John Duarte had just gone up by 900 votes. So we've got about 4 more seats out there possibly that we can win. But the one thing I know in Washington, they don't hand the gavels out in small, medium, and large size. It's one size gavel with the ability to subpoena and hold this government accountable, secure this border, fight to make us energy independent, give parents a say in their kids' education, and actually look what the DOJ is doing, what the DHS is doing, and others. And that's exactly what we're going to do. On day one in this House, we will repeal 87,000 new IRS agents.
Congressman Kevin McCarthy, the minority leader, Republican from California, on Fox News Channel Wednesday night. Politico reports that now that Kevin McCarthy has won the House Republican speakership nomination, his real work begins. His victory over internal critics on Tuesday marked the starting gun for a 7-week marathon. With his majority looking much thinner than many in both parties expected, he will need to persuade almost all of the 36 members who opposed him on Tuesday's secret ballot to back him for the gavel in the public on the floor on the vote on January 3rd. That from Politico. There's an NBC story about the incoming House under Republican control, and it has this: investigations will dominate the new Congress, from the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic and allegations of politicization at the Justice Department to America's botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. But none will attract as much attention as the planned investigation into the business dealings of the president's son Hunter 2 years before a potential Joe Biden re-election bid. Well, today the expected chairs of 2 key committees held a news conference: James Comer, who will lead Oversight and Reform, and Jim Jordan, who will chair Judiciary. First, Congressman Comer.
Today we're going to provide you with something that you all aren't used to with respect to congressional investigations, and that's evidence. Committee Republicans have spoken with multiple whistleblowers from numerous schemes involving the Biden family, reviewed Hunter Biden's laptop, and received documents of previously unknown transactions. What we found are business plans aimed at targets around the world based on influence peddling, including with people closely tied to foreign governments like China and Russia. We also found plans based in the United States where the Biden family swindled investors of hundreds of thousands of dollars, all with Joe Biden's participation and knowledge. In 2019, shortly after announcing his campaign for president, Joe Biden told the American people he had nothing to do with and never had conversations with his family about their business dealings. That was a lie. Whistleblowers described President Biden as chairman of the board for these businesses. He personally participated in meetings and phone calls. Documents show that he was a partner with access to an office. To be clear, Joe Biden is the big guy. This evidence raises troubling questions about whether President Biden is a national security risk and about whether he is compromised by foreign governments. Despite the president's claim that he wasn't involved in Biden family business schemes, these photos show Joe Biden meeting with his family associates while vice president. Right there behind Paul. 4 different pictures. Committee Republicans have identified over 50 countries the Biden family sought businesses in. On the international side of the Biden family business, the deals were often led by Hunter Biden. And that map there behind Clay shows all the countries where the Bidens had a footprint in international business dealings. The investigation reveals a family that engaged with some of America's most powerful adversaries, planning to sell one of the largest sources of cobalt for electric vehicles in the world to the Chinese, for example. The Bidens flourished and became millionaires by simply offering access to the family.
Congressman James Comer, Republican from Kentucky, he's now ranking Republican on the Oversight and Reform Committee, in line to be chair as the new Congress convenes in January with a Republican majority. Hunter Biden, by the way, already under federal investigation. He has said, "I handled my affairs legally and appropriately." Congressman Comer joined today by Congressman Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio, now ranking member on Judiciary Committee and soon to be chair.
I would just start with this question. What part of Mr. Comer's presentation was Russian disinformation? I mean, never forget what happened on October 19th, 2020, 15 days before the most important election we have in our country. Who's going to be the next president of the United States? 15 days before that, Mr. Brennan, Mr. Clapper, and 49 other people signed a letter that said the following. It is for these reasons that we write to say that the arrival on the U.S. political scene of emails purportedly belonging to Vice President Biden's son, Hunter, has all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation. They further went on to say, we want to emphasize that we do not know if the emails provided to the New York Post are genuine or not, just that our experience makes us deeply suspicious that the Russian government played a significant role in this case. And of course, that letter became the pretext for suppressing this story, again, just days before the most important election we have in our country. So I would ask this, was J.P. Morgan's suspicious activity report to the Treasury Department, was that just a classic earmark of a Russian information operation? How about when Hunter Biden sent the email that Mr. Comer pointed to, sent the email asking for keys to his new office space, one for himself, one for President Biden, one for his uncle Jim Biden, and one for the emissary for the chairman of the Chinese energy company CFCC. Was that just Russian disinformation operation in place? What part of Mr. Comer's presentation prompted the FBI to go to Facebook and say, hey, you want to be on the lookout for Russian misinformation here this election season? What part of his presentation would prompt that? And I think it's also important to understand, never forget how this story has changed. I mean, think about this. When it started off, it was, no, it's not his laptop. It's not his laptop. Then it was, well, it's his laptop, but remember, it's Russian disinformation and no one did anything wrong. Then it was, well, maybe he did something wrong, but President Biden didn't know about it. And now it's, well, maybe President Biden knew about it and was involved, but it didn't influence his decisions. In fact, yesterday, there was a story in Politico which said that. The story in Politico yesterday, investigating the investigators, dim strategists to launch counterpunch to House GOP. Story in Politico yesterday, here's what it said in there. Quote, no evidence has publicly emerged that Joe Biden's decisions were affected by his son's business dealings. Wow, we've went from it wasn't his laptop and it was Russian disinformation to, oh, whatever was in there didn't affect the president's business dealings, even though he was involved, even though the laptop was real, even though it wasn't disinformation. That's how far we've come. So I think I think there are all kinds of questions that need to be answered, and we're determined to get there. Here's some of them that I have. Did the FBI brief Twitter as well? We know they briefed Facebook. We know that had an impact on the election. There's been surveys done where thousands and thousands of voters across this country said it might have impacted their decision in the election in 2020. Did the FBI brief any of the 51 former intelligence officials who signed that letter? Again, that letter that became the pretext for suppressing this story. Who did the briefings? Who briefed Facebook?
Congressman Jim Jordan at a news conference with other House Republicans talking about the investigations that they say they will launch in the next Congress when they will be in the majority and chair of the committees. More from an NBC News article previewing the next Congress and investigations. NBC writes, while the House January 6th committee, which Speaker Nancy Pelosi launched in the wake of the Capitol attack, will disband at the end of this Congress, Republicans have their own ideas for select House committees in the new year. Congressman Kevin McCarthy, the likely Speaker, has vowed to create a select committee to investigate China. And many other Republican members want to form a special panel to investigate the Biden administration's chaotic and deadly withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan. A suicide bombing at the Kabul airport killed 13 service members and scores of Afghans. That from NBC News. When Senator Ron Johnson, Republican from Wisconsin, who was just reelected, was debating his Democratic opponent Mandela Barnes in October, Mandela Barnes said that Ron Johnson was once warned by the FBI that Russia was trying to turn him into a Russian asset. Ron Johnson replied that that briefing in 2020 was an FBI setup, which was then leaked to the media to smear him. News reports of the debate in Milwaukee say the audience laughed at that part. Today, Senator Johnson was questioning FBI Director Christopher Wray about that.
Both Senator Grassley and I received an unsolicited briefing by members of the FBI, which I knew immediately was a setup. No new information whatsoever. I knew it was a setup, and I was correct because 9 months later, on May 1st, it was leaked to the Washington Post to smear me. I have written you publicly a number of times asking who directed that briefing. Are you prepared to tell me in public who directed that briefing now?
Senator, first off, I can't discuss specific defensive briefings more broadly, and that's a longstanding practice.
So tell me then, why have you refused to meet with us to privately tell us who directed that briefing?
So, if I may finish my answer to the question. It's longstanding practice not to discuss specific defensive briefings. We have, as my understanding, responded in writing to a letter that you sent. I think
it's bureaucratic. It's bureaucratic gobbledygook is what that is. That's not a response.
We offered in that letter to provide a senior executive of the FBI to walk through in detail our process.
What your process is, but not specifically who directed a briefing that was used to smear me. Have you looked into the leaking of that briefing to the Washington Post? Have you investigated that?
I'm not going to discuss specific investigations. As to the briefing question and who directs it, let me be very clear about this. When it comes to election-related defensive briefings, there is not a single person who makes that decision. That is an interagency process that was set up by the prior administration, signed off on by the former president,
well, there are
Office of the Director of National
persons in that interagency, correct? So there would be persons. So we should know who those persons are. Why won't you tell us who directed that briefing? The persons then.
I would refer you to the process that was put in place, and we can give you more information about the process if you would like.
FBI Director Christopher Wray. Questions from Senator Ron Johnson, Republican from Wisconsin, at today's Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee hearing. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Live Friday on C-SPAN Radio at 11:45 a.m. Eastern, a discussion on concentrated political and economic power and the impact on the U.S. constitutional form of government. Maryland Democrat Representative Jamie Raskin will give the keynote speech. Georgetown University Law Center and the American Constitution Society for Law and Policy are hosting the event. That's live Friday, starting at 11:45 a.m. Eastern on C-SPAN Radio. Tell your smart speaker, Play C-SPAN Radio.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and also on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. Some updates on Russia's war in Ukraine. This from Associated Press. Russian airstrikes targeted Ukraine's energy facilities again Thursday as the first snow of the season fell in Kyiv, a harbinger of the hardship to come if Moscow's missiles continue to take out power and gas plants as winter descends. And separately, the United Nations announced the extension of a deal to ensure exports of grain and fertilizers from Ukraine that were disrupted by the war. The deal was set to expire soon, renewing fears of a global food crisis if exports were blocked from one of the world's largest grain producers. That from AP. President Biden this week requesting Congress approve another $38 billion in aid for Ukraine, military and general budget support. It will be part of the bigger spending package that will keep the federal government open past the current deadline of December 16th. The Biden administration has provided more than $18 billion worth of military aid to Ukraine since Russia invaded in late February. Some U.S. House Republicans, and the House Republicans will be in the majority in the new Congress, are not supporting the new request for aid. They held a news conference today. Here is Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia.
Separately from congressional appropriations, the Biden administration has already committed $17.6 billion in security assistance directly to Ukraine since the start of the war just this year. It's been about 10 months. The Biden administration has also authorized 23 drawdowns, that's selling weapons and equipment, under the Presidential Drawdown Authority since August of 2021 for a total value of $10.6 billion. Now let's compare that, all of this, to what our border receives. Our Border Patrol asks for $15.46 billion to secure the border of the United States. President Trump's border wall would have only cost $22 billion. With the money we've sent to Ukraine, we could have already secured our border, but we're not doing that. We're ignoring the dangers happening at our border and the national security crisis that's happening in our country while we are completely protecting another country's border and also waging a proxy war with Russia.
Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican from Georgia, a news conference today on Capitol Hill. She and about 10 other House Republicans introducing a resolution calling for an audit of money appropriated by Congress to Ukraine, both military and non-military, and also an investigation of what Congresswoman Greene calls outrageous corruption involving the now bankrupt cryptocurrency exchange FTX. There's a conspiracy theory making the rounds saying that Ukraine sent billions of dollars in foreign aid to FTX, which then laundered the money and sent it to the U.S. Democratic Party. As for the procedure today, Congresswoman Greene introducing a bill as a privileged resolution. TheHill.com explains that it will be referred to the relevant committees where members will have 14 business days to either reject it or approve it for a vote on the House floor. If the bill is not brought up in the committee within that time frame, she has the option of forcing a House floor vote on the bill without it being referred to by a committee. At the Pentagon today, a reporter's question to the Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh about how giving U.S. weapons to Ukraine has affected the U.S. stockpiles and military readiness.
There's been a number of initiatives to restock some of the HIMARS, like announced today. I'm wondering if you can speak at all to if the U.S. has enough in its stocks to continue sending critical weapons to Ukraine, and what the department is doing to help resupply those stocks.
Thanks, Caitlin, for the question. So the secretary spoke to this yesterday, and I think the chairman did as well. We're not going to dip below our readiness levels, and we continue to assess our readiness levels with each, whether it's a presidential drawdown package or security assistance that we announce. Our goal is to make sure that we are setting up Ukraine for this enduring war that Russia started in February, and we're in it for the long haul. As the secretary said yesterday, we're going to continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. And so You're going to continue to see packages announced from this department, from other agencies when it comes to support for Ukraine. But again, our support, we're going to continue to do what we can for Ukraine in any way that we can for the long term as well.
The Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh at her briefing. A court in the Netherlands today convicting two men that were high in Russia's security agencies and a Ukrainian separatist aligned with Russia of the murders of the people who died in the 2014 downing of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 over Ukraine. There were 298 deaths. A third Russian was acquitted because of lack of evidence. All three convicted tried in absentia. The court also held that Russia had overall control of the separatist Donetsk People's Republic in eastern Ukraine, where it is said the attack by missile was launched. Back in the U.S., Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas asked today about immigration policy at a Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee hearing. Specifically, a federal judge on Wednesday giving the Biden administration 5 weeks to end Title 42, that policy that allowed the expulsion of asylum seekers arriving at the U.S.-Mexico border based on COVID-19 health emergency grounds. It was put in place under former President Trump, continued under President Biden, and resulted in over 2 million expulsions. The judge saying that Title 42 is an arbitrary and capricious policy that violates federal regulatory law. Here is Senator James Lankford, Republican from Oklahoma, questioning Secretary Mayorkas.
You and I have talked about Title 42 for about 18 months, and I've asked you the question, what happens when Title 42 goes away? And for 18 months, you've said, we're working on it. Well, Judge Sullivan just stepped in and unilaterally canceled out Title 42. So we're in this very odd situation right now where DHS is in one court asking to extend Title 42 a little longer, and in another court asking to cancel Title 42 altogether. But we're still waiting to try to figure out what happens now and how many people are about to cross the border. What's the plan for dealing with this mass migration, illegal immigration coming now post-Title 42?
Senator, what we requested of Judge Sullivan in the District Court of D.C. was an orderly wind-down period of 35 days, and which was unopposed and which was granted by the court. What we are doing is precisely what we announced we would do in April of this year, and we have indeed been executing on the plan. It's a six different lines of effort, and I will review them very, very quickly given the limited time. Surging resources to the southern border, including personnel, technology, facilities capabilities, and transportation, medical support. 2, increasing our Customs and Border Protection processing efficiency to mitigate potential overcrowding. We've been digitizing, for example, our electronic A files, the immigration files, when individuals are placed in proceedings. We are 3, enhancing the consequences for unlawful entry, especially with respect to individuals who seek to evade law enforcement, including removal, detention, and criminal prosecution when warranted. 4, we are seeking to bolster the capacity of nonprofit organizations, state and local officials, and working very closely with them. 5th, we are targeting and disrupting the smuggling organizations and the transnational criminal organizations. In fact, we have effected more than 5,000 arrests and more than 6,000 disruption events. And that means arrests of individuals, the breakdown of smuggling of stash houses, the seizure of the instrumentalities that these smuggling organizations use. And 6, we're working with our partners to the south to deter irregular migration. And I spoke earlier in response to Ranking Member Portman's question about the fact that this is a tremendous hemispheric challenge. We are seeing the movement of people, and the demographics of the population that we are encountering at the border has changed dramatically.
It has, and there's a couple of big challenges in this. One is the numbers just came in for October. It's the 3rd highest number in recorded history. So while those things were implemented, the numbers continue to accelerate, and this goes back to the estimates when Title 42 goes away. There was an expectation from Intel to be able to say these numbers will surge even greater. You built a Venezuelan policy on trying to be able to deter Venezuelans based on Title 42. That just went away. And so what we're trying to figure out is what is the plan? Because the plan you just articulated has led to the third highest number for any single month in history.
So there are a few points, if I may, Senator, and thank you. Number one, the number of encounters is not equal to the number of unique individuals.
Correct. Yeah, we know that. Yep.
Because Title 42 creates a potential for the ease of recidivism, number one. Number two, we're working with our partners to the south, with Mexico, with respect to the end of Title 42, and whether we will be able to continue our thus far successful program with respect to Venezuelan nationals and use our Title 8 authorities. But we also have other opportunities ahead of us because, as we sought to do earlier, and we will resume this effort, is an enhanced use of expedited removal, which is a Title 8 authority. So we're looking at our consequence regimes and how we can most effectively employ them.
A lot of people counting on these numbers coming down, and they're not. They're going up, and they continue to be able to rise. And so while we're examining these things and looking at it, the numbers continue to rise on this with the end of Title 42 coming in 35 days. We expect it's going to accelerate even higher. There is an expectation that your department is going to change this number dramatically.
Senator James Lankford, Republican from Oklahoma, at the Governmental Affairs and Homeland Security Committee hearing questioning the Homeland Security Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas. The judge has set December 21st as the date the Title 42 immigration policy for the expulsions will go away. New York Times writing that in striking down Title 42, Judge Sullivan referred to evidence provided by plaintiffs in the case that during the first 7 months that Title 42 was in place, border authorities encountered on average just one migrant per day who tested positive for COVID-19. And the judge also agreed with the ACLU's argument that the agency had failed to consider alternatives such as processing migrants outdoors and ramping up vaccinations to limit the spread of COVID-19. Wall Street today, the Dow down 7, NASDAQ down 38, S&P down 12. Congressman Jim Langevin, Democrat from Rhode Island, tweeted this morning, "This year I was denied boarding on a flight because my wheelchair is powered by a lithium-ion battery. My story was not unique. Today I'm taking action to ensure that doesn't continue to happen to other Americans with disabilities. Tune in at 10 a.m. Eastern." And he linked to cspan.org. We covered this hearing before the Aviation Subcommittee of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee on disabled airline passenger accessibility. Congressman Langevin was the first witness.
In the past year alone, I've been wrongfully denied boarding on multiple occasions because my wheelchair's lithium-ion batteries, despite presenting documentation that they met all applicable safety standards as determined by the Federal Aviation Administration. Lithium-ion batteries are becoming increasingly prevalent in assistive devices, which means that these incidents will only occur more often. That's why I'm working to introduce a bill that I call the Wheels Chairs on Airplanes Act to ensure that airlines' policies for lithium-ion batteries in wheelchairs and other assistive devices are no more restrictive than applicable FAA safety standards. On another occasion, several years ago, I remember watching through the airplane window as a baggage handler was sending my wheelchair up to the jet bridge on the belt loader. They placed it on the belt loader without holding it or locking it in place, and I watched as it rolled off the belt loader as the belt loader was raised to the jetway as it crashed down to the ground. Well, I have to tell you, I still get an uneasy feeling every time my wheelchair is brought out of the cargo hold. After all, if it's damaged, I'm stranded. My wheelchair is essentially my legs. As you will hear from other witnesses today, my experiences are not unique. In fact, in 2018 alone, passengers in the United States filed more than 36,000 disability-related complaints with airlines. I think we can all agree that the status quo is unacceptable. So that's why I've been working to improve air travel accessibility throughout my time in Congress. For example, I introduced language during the 115th Congress to create an airline passengers with disabilities Bill of Rights. With the support of this committee, that language became law as part of the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2018, and I thank you. This Congress, I introduced H.R. 1696, the Air Carrier Access Amendments Act, with Representative Titus and Cohen, both of whom serve in the subcommittee, and I thank them for their partnership. In closing, H.R. 1696 proposes a two-pronged solution, namely, it would improve air travel accessibility while holding airlines accountable when they violate passengers' rights. Overall, we must work to break down all barriers in our society so that people with disabilities can live more full and independent lives. Air travel must be a part of that effort.
Congressman Jim Langevin, Democrat from Rhode Island, testifying before the House Subcommittee on Aviation today. He is the first quadriplegic ever elected to Congress. He did not run for re-election this year, retiring after 11 terms. There was a second panel of witnesses at today's hearing. It included Graham Keithley, Vice President of Airlines for America, a trade group representing airlines. Congressman Garrett Graves, Republican from Louisiana, asking what the airlines are doing in this area.
Mr. Keithley, in your testimony, you described a number of the actions that airlines have taken, and you're part of the commitment to improve accessibility. Can you elaborate on some of those actions and provide an update on the commitments that you all have made?
Yes, Ranking Member Graves, thank you for the question. We would characterize our commitments and our initiatives in three steps. We have industry, airline particular initiatives, we have industry-wide initiatives, and we have initiatives to improve the entire holistic environment, air travel environment. Airlines right now, and our members in particular, have taken on the renewed commitment to improve accessibility. It's a 4-part action commitment to include having the accessibility advisory groups to incorporate the disability community into our operations and procedures development. We have improvement in handling mobility aids. We have the improvement to our training, as well as our support for the study and development of new technologies to make aircraft more accessible. Along that initiative, we also have a number of industry-wide initiatives, including those led by our companion association, the International Air Transport Association, to improve coding of disability requests, to improve air mobility aid handling. And then we also have the efforts, which I mentioned earlier, regarding RESNA and the improvement of mobility aid handling. So it's a multi-part process to improve the accessibility experience.
Graham Keithley, Vice President of Airlines for America. Question by Congressman Garrett Graves, the ranking Republican on the Aviation Subcommittee. You can find this full hearing at our video library, cspan.org. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter, word for word, to get the stories Washington is talking about sent to your inbox every day. You can subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.